Hello and welcome to ChatDPS. This week, Robert and I will be exploring a recent report from Europe suggesting that a could do better report for EU businesses. We explore a new report on critical infrastructure in the US, and we revisit the Australian super cyber incident. Or was it? Anyway, according to their CEO, Mr. Paul Schroeder. We'll wait and see what he has to say. That's the last bit that we'll be covering off anyway today. To get things underway, Robert, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA, their report was released. This seems to be a little bit of a while ago, in fact, but a couple of months ago maybe. But it's now just coming to light in terms of some of the key findings. So it's a report by a trusted body attempting to shine a light on the state of cybersecurity in the EU. Now then, for context, the EU has what we've been describing as the gold standard in cyber laws. They've got GDPR and its digital trust standard IDAS. The report suggests a score of 62.65 out of 100. Seems to be a little bit off of the boil on that. So with all the laws and standards available, the learnings are either that they could do better, or the best is still not good enough to prevent loss of data. What do you take from these numbers, Robert?
I think, for example, the 62 number you mentioned, I think that relates to the maturity of organizations from a cybersecurity perspective across the EU member states. So that will be some sort of average. I'm sure some states, some of the bigger ones will be doing pretty well, some of the smaller ones not so well. So that's like an average maturity level. I think what we'd say about the EU, like you touched on, is that they're years ahead of Australia, to make a comparison in terms of where their laws and regulations and the maturity of their organizations are. And yet some of these scores are still a little bit on the low side, like you say, could do better. But when you reflect back on how Australia's doing and some of the work that's been done here to improve the levels of cyber resilience, some of the changes in legislation that have happened and some that have been talked about, I suppose you could sort of say, well, Australia's got a long way to go. EU certainly has got a way to go. But look, I think my takeaway is it's good to see this sort of report. It's good to sort of see their view on the state of the union from a cybersecurity perspective, where they can improve, because that just allows them to then refocus with additional directives. And I think, they talk about trying to unify some of the guidelines to try and make sure that they apply equally across nations, because obviously, like I said, some nations are very large, some are very small, some have got a lot of resources, some not so much. And so it's about lifting the levels for all nations, member states.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing there is with, sort of like there are certain things where things are going really, really well. Yeah, I mean, sort of secure internet usage, for instance, is at 93, indicating that the general population are being more careful than before, maybe using endpoint protections, maybe using, sort of like a firewall and a couple of other bits and pieces, I suppose. Where it gets a little bit more complicated seems to be where it's sort of like, the rubber hits the roads. Some key areas where it's high, again, a score of 90, where it appears that enterprises within the EU have better results regarding malicious activity or hacking. However, the report notes a reluctance by many SMEs to report, despite mandatory reporting requirements, which we've had here for some time now. And I think that in total fairness, we're kind of witnessing the same kind of thing that's going on. However, the surprise package for me was around governance, and 32 out of 100 for me was a disastrous score. I mean, why so low? Like I say, a massive disappointment to me. But is it something that we're doing better than they are, or is it about the same? Or I mean, like I say, they're so far ahead of us in terms of what their legislative requirements are, and yet they are still not doing what needs to be done around general governance of running a business.
Yeah, look, I doubt that Australia is doing any better. It's probably doing worse. It'll be interesting to sort of see if there's any kind of equivalent GRC, governance, risk, compliance metrics being used in Australia. But yeah, look, it's surprising given, as I said, the levels of maturity that the EU states have above Australia in terms of all of these frameworks that they've introduced. But the fact that they're scoring themselves 32 out of 100 shows that there's definitely an issue around around governance and probably GRC more broadly. And yeah, clearly something that they need to work on. And I think it's a theme that we see in Australia. I think it's a theme that we see globally.
Yeah, I suppose the very last point I want to make about this before we go forward is the fact that what appears to be the critical problem is a cultural change that's required in order to be able
Mm.
to run these programs,
Yes.
with diligence, with certainty. I mean, because that appears to be what the stumbling block here is. Maybe I'm overreaching in terms of what the numbers are actually suggesting, but I mean, it's a cultural change in order to be able to take yourself along this journey, right? I mean, is that right, or am I sort of deluding myself?
Well, it is. I guess it comes in broadly from two directions. One, you expect leadership change, and that comes from the board and the CEO and the chairperson. So there's that organizational direction around governance, risk, and compliance. But also from the other side, it's from regulation and making sure that organizations and boards are doing the right thing when it comes to doing proper risk assessments and making sure they're complying with laws and frameworks and guidelines. So, and if organizations are not doing enough, well, I mean, we've talked about it here in Australia. There needs to be consequences, and behaviour needs to change if it's not happening from within the organisation itself.
So moving on, reports of ransomware attacks in the US on their critical infrastructure rise by 9%. This is a story that was taken from IT News. Ransomware was the most pervasive cyber threat in the US, particularly for critical infrastructure in 2024, as complaints regarding such attacks jumped 9% over 2023, the FBI has revealed. So this is the FBI saying it. It's not, some lowly organization like us trying to sort of like put some scaremongering out into it. Ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure accounted for almost half of all ransomware complaints received in 2024. It's just a state of that particular vertical, I guess, in terms of where they're going and what they're doing. And they're seeing that the critical infrastructure side of things is ramping up quite considerably. This report details the scam and cyber-enabled fraud impacts across sectors and various demographic groups. The report focuses on critical infrastructure, which is a term that encompasses 16 sectors that include chemical plants, communications, energy, food production, transportation, water systems, healthcare, that kind of thing. So, and it's suggesting a record $16.6 billion, that's US dollars, so $26 billion Australian in cyber and scam related losses overall were reported in 2024, which is a 33% increase on 2023, according to this report. Obviously, the US was sort of like right up there in terms of our understanding of, sort of like if you're gonna scam anybody, you're gonna be going into the US to do it. So it's probably number one, number two in the world around, sort of like the most hacked thing. Australia's at number 9 in that list. I mean, so our percentages are going to be roughly the same. I mean, in terms of which, where we're going and what we're doing. I'm sort of extrapolating those numbers a little bit. Do you think that's reasonable? I mean, is critical infrastructure really something that we really need to be on our toes about here as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So while the quantums we're talking about, and you mentioned, was it 26 billion Australian equivalent from these sorts of attacks, while the quantums are going to be significantly different for Australia, the actual risk, the threat, the percentage increase you'd expect to see in terms of attacks would be probably broadly in line, because I think as we've seen when we've looked at some of these 2024 year review type reports, Australia tends to be in the top 10, top 5 for countries that suffer these sorts of cyber incidents, whether it's ransomware or cyber related fraud. And yeah, critical infrastructure is one of those targets. They tend to have supply chain issues, a lot of OT, operational technology, which tend to be easy targets, as do the supply chains. And so that's one of the reasons why the Australian government has tried to make changes in that space by toughening up the security of critical infrastructure legislation. So it's definitely an area that needs to be looked at. The levels of resilience need to be built up, and I think we'll continue to see that over the next few years in Australia.
Yeah, SOCI, and I mean, particularly with
Yep.
SOCI, it's OT. So, I mean,
Uh-huh.
sort of like operational systems and technologies that exist. So we're seeing a massive increase in that. So if we're not actually acting upon that sooner rather than later, and again, these are board decisions. These are board decisions to actually say, look, this is our core business. This is
Yeah.
what we need to be doing in order to be able to take a step
Yeah.
forward.
And and
And
and,
those
and if
guys,
and if Yeah, and if you're under SOCI, the board has to be signing off on annual risk assessments. So it's like they absolutely need to be involved in these decisions.
Yeah, I guess we're yet to see what those risk assessments actually look like under some of those arrangements, because I mean my guess is that they're not going to be as thorough in the first year as they will be in the second. So I mean it's just trying to work out exactly what's acceptable and what's not. Well, I think we're guessing at this moment in time that ISO
Yeah.
27001 is the weapon of choice for most organizations here in Australia. I mean there's so much more to it, right?
Yeah, and again, I think this touches a little bit on the first report where it's all about organisation maturity. So last year would have been I think the first year that SOCI organisations would have been putting in their risk assessments signed off by the board. So this is fairly new. Levels of maturity would be fairly low. So again, it's about building up that maturity, building up experience, getting feedback from the ASD or ACSC, and actually really working on those plans and building up that resilience.
Okay, and finally, so Australian Super was not hacked. The fund responds to a cyber incident. I'm not sure. When I first read this, I wasn't sure if it was tongue in cheek, desperation, semantics, or just plain clutching at straws. And I think it's probably the latter of all of it, or maybe just disinformation. Criminals use stolen passwords and personal identity information from other sources to access accounts to commit fraud, unlike other recent cyber incidents reported in the media over the last few years. Cyber criminals did not access our systems, CEO Paul Schroeder said. I mean, I don't know whether he lives on a different planet to the rest of us, but I mean, obviously, what he's trying to say is, look, it wasn't our fault. They'd got this information from somewhere else. My question is, what the hell was in your risk assessment?
I mean,
Have you never heard of all of the things people are doing in order to be able to achieve this? I mean, it's a
yeah.
particular type of cyber incident, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be quite worried if I was hearing that from my CEO when whether somebody takes those credentials from the dark web, whatever the source might be, if they come essentially through the front door and go into your customers' accounts and take $500,000 or whatever it might be, but out of those customers' accounts, they're in your systems and they're taking money out of your systems. So clearly there's a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness. I think it's a little bit embarrassing to be coming out and saying that sort of thing, but it does kind of go to that point of do boards have enough awareness? Do we need to improve education amongst boards when it comes to cyber risk?
Yeah, so cyber training for boards, I mean, something that you're very on board with and very particular about in terms of the boards that you've actually addressed and helped with that kind of assessment. I mean, he could have done with some PR assistance on this one. I'm pretty sure of it. And
Absolutely.
indeed, I think the industry CEO, I think it was Mary Delahunty, and she said, look, this is being looked into as a cybersecurity incident. There were other, in fairness, we don't want to just sort of like throw this, Australian Super under the bus or anything like that. But I mean, obviously there were other organisations, including the Insignia, Expand, Art, CBUS, and Media Super, were all involved. One of which is my provider, and I think that my provider actually did reach out with messages through the platform and actually saying, look, we're aware of the fact that there's a problem. Let's just keep on top of this. I thought the telling quote was, whilst I can't say a lot at the moment, I can say that the cyber criminals undertook a coordinated, well-funded and sophisticated attack on our system. I think we can take that word for word across every hack that we've
They're
seen.
always sophisticated attacks,
They're
aren't they?
always sophisticated and they're
Yeah.
always, coordinated. But in total fairness, I mean, I get where she's coming from. It must be really kind of, how do you actually vary that? But when you're being told that, oh, well, it wasn't a cyber incident because, the third party information. I mean, credential stuffing, for crying out loud. Have you not heard of that? I mean, it's a fairly significant piece of what's going on today. Okay, so yes or no? Who
Yes,
knows?
yes, yes, it was a hack. And I think the key thing is we want to see a significant response from the superannuation industry going forward. They need to do much better when it comes to protecting customers' accounts.
Okay, that's perfect. Robert, that was ChatDPS for this week. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Look forward to catching up with you very soon.
Thanks, Nick.